Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Stephanie Greenwood. I'm a program officer at the Victoria Foundation, a place-based foundation here in Newark. And I'm delighted to have been asked to moderate this panel. I was especially excited to have a chance to meet the women before you, who I think Women Designing the Future is a very apt title for this panel. These women leaders really are designing and pushing the boundaries and definitions of the field of urban agriculture in ways that I think will be really interesting and helpful for our discussion, and also for the field as a whole in terms of promoting what is next technologically, in terms of response to climate change, in terms of questions of social and economic and racial justice. And so I'm not going to take any more time than that. I'm going to ask them each to come up in turn and share a brief presentation about, first of all, introduce themselves personally, and then share a little bit about what their organization does to confront food system challenges using urban agriculture systems and technologies and social relationships as far as they affect us today, and also looking toward the future. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So if I could ask our first presenter, Ms. Lisa Newman, who's the Chief Operating Officer at AeroFarms, to please come up.
Thank you, Stephanie. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about AeroFarms and how AeroFarms is really driving the future of farming. And I want to do it by showcasing how AeroFarms is doing more with less. But before I do that, I would just like to highlight a few macro tensions that currently exist in food security. So the first one is the use of excessive water. So excessive water to irrigate our crops, and in fact, 60% of our fresh water is used for crop irrigation, of which 70% is then contaminated by ag with the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Furthermore, the earth, in the last 40 years, the earth has lost a third of its arable land. And this is primarily due to soil erosion and pollution through pesticides as well. It might be interesting to note that soil erosion is occurring 100 times faster than it can form. And in fact, topsoil, it takes 500 years for 2.5 centimeters of topsoil to form. Couple that with the mouths that we're going to have to feed. So 50% more people we will need to feed in 2050. And this really begs the question, how are we going to feed everyone? In addition, and this one just breaks my heart, 76% of our greens is lost. So this really highlights, it's lost before it hits our kitchen tables. And this really highlights the excessive amount of food waste that we have. 50% of our greens is lost in the field. 7%, like my kids, can't survive a cross-country road trip because 95% of our greens come from California and Arizona. 14% is lost at the stores, so by removing products because they're past their sell-by dates. And then 41% we as consumers throw out because we buy excessively and we can't eat it in time before the product goes bad. So at AeroFarms, we are perfecting a new way of growing. And we're doing it by creating modern-day farmers like myself so that we can produce more with less. So this is AeroFarms' 9th farm. It's our first commercial farm. It's just on the other side of Newark in the Ironbound. We are just about ready to kick off phase 2 of our commercial farm. It is built on a brownfield, and it was built from an existing warehouse. This, once it's complete, it will be 70,000 square feet in total, and it has the capacity to produce 1.2 million pounds of baby leafy greens annually. So for us, we really maximize our growing space by growing up. Our grow towers that you see here are 80 feet long, 36 feet high. They consist of 12 levels. And in fact, so our baby leafy greens, we can grow them in 15 days. That allows us to have 24 crop turns annually. And this allows us to be 390 times more productive than traditional field farming per square foot. Doing more with less. So at Aero Farms, our mission is really to build and operate these environmentally responsible farms throughout the world, because we want to nourish our communities with safe, nutritious, and delicious food by growing locally. So how do we grow? Well, it's a combination. We use LED lighting with aeroponics, coupled with a closed loop fertigation system. The Aeroponic Mist allows us to use 95% less water than traditional field farming and 40% less than hydroponic growing as well. So as a scientist, this really appealed to me because I have grown every way possible, and Aero Farms, it's really the most sustainable way to grow, and it uses the least amount of water. So at Aero Farms, the media that we grow on is cloth. This is our patented technology. This cloth is made out of just around 100 recyclable water bottles. It is reusable, so when we're done with this cloth, we wash it, we dry it, we reuse it. This cloth functions to anchor our plants in, so allowing the roots to grow down and suspend in air. And then it's the aeroponic mist that feeds those roots. In addition, we don't use any pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides as well. So our product is a ready-to-eat product. And one other stat here as well is that because it is a ready-to-eat product, we don't have to triple wash our plants, so no washing. So in 2004, Aero Farms started using LED lighting. And as a plant scientist, this really appeals to me as well, because there's so much you can do with lighting to manipulate plants. So plants cannot run away from their environment, unlike ourselves, so they have to adapt. So there's a lot that we can do with lighting. So we can optimize for growth with lighting, but we can also optimize and enrich for nutrients and for flavor as well. I wanted to just highlight that Aero Farms is a vertically integrated company as well. So not only do we grow, we harvest, we pack, we ship, we also have an R&D department, engineering department. We have operations, and we have our farmers as well. And so what I love about being the COO at Aero Farms is that all of these, I work at the nexus of all of this, bringing it together to really, we're working on next-gen grow systems, right? Different crops that we can produce. And we also have a partnership with Dell, where we have a lot of sensing, and we use imaging technology to learn more about plant growth. So this is sort of a pitch as well to recruit. We're more than just farmers. And then the last thing here I'd like to highlight is that we do grow locally. I think so. We are in various retail shops. I believe the farthest that we ship is a 30-mile radius. And our packaging here. So we've thought a lot about our packaging, and in fact, we use 40% less plastic. So the base is from recycled plastic, and we purposefully did not have a plastic lid, and instead we use film here so that we can reduce the plastic that we use as well. And so then finally, I'd like to highlight all the women that work at AeroFarms. I'm humbled and privileged to work with so many amazing women. And in fact, AeroFarms, the workforce is comprised of 46% women. At our farms, at our farm here in Newark, 60% of our farm workers are women. And in our corporate environment, just under 37% are women as well. So I have women engineers of every kind. Our HR and community champion is here as well. We have biologists, horticulturalists, all kinds of, and farmers as well. So I urge everyone to check out AeroFarms as well. So just to highlight, so we also have one woman that is a COO, AKA the head of lettuce. I do have a master's in molecular biology and a PhD in plant sciences from the University of Oxford. I did my postdoc at UC Berkeley, where I did research on ear and tassel development in corn. I am a Midwesterner. I did return home to work at DuPont Pioneer for 13 years, built them world-class greenhouses and a world-class team, and looking for something to challenge me again. And so AeroFarms really checked all these boxes. So besides being, I am the COO, but more importantly, I am also a soccer mom and a baseball mom and a wife and a daughter and an aunt and a sister. And last but least, an Aero farmer. So just a couple more that I'd just like to highlight as well. So I mentioned our community champion is here with me, so our HR director. We also have our greens traffic controller, who is our harvest, pack, and shipping manager. We have many greens whisperers who are horticulturalists and farmers. We have our greens cheerleader, who is our nutritionist and dietitian. And we have our plant professor, who is our VP of R&D as well. So I would just like to say again, we can never have enough talented women at AeroFarms, always looking for more talent, and more than happy to speak with anyone who is interested to come grow with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Please jot down questions as they occur to you. We're going to have questions at the end of all the panelists' remarks, but hang on to them, don't forget them. One of the really fascinating things about urban agriculture is the breadth of approaches and points of focus, and you'll hear, I think, a lot of that today. We're going to go down the line starting at the far end, so I'm going to next invite up Annie Novak, and there were so many possible sort of ways to introduce Annie. I know she's the head of Growing Chefs, which I think she's going to talk about, but also a prolific writer and a rooftop gardener, and a sort of, I think, a pioneer, safe to say, in this space. So please welcome Annie Novak.
What a great panel. I'm so excited to be up here, and I can't wait for you guys to come meet us in the next room over. Great, so I will introduce myself briefly. What you're looking at now is a picture of the Eagle Street Rooftop Farm, which is the green roof commercial vegetable farm that I co-founded in 2008, and we started farming in 2009. That is what I'm going to focus on speaking about today in the context of talking about women in technology, because while I am a ground level farmer and gardener by background, the technology aspect of the work that I do is this project as a green roof. The other site that I work on, and I have worked for 13 years, is the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. And if there's anyone who hasn't been there, I cannot encourage you more energetically to go. It's stunning. It's 250 acres in the Bronx. 50 acres are woodland that have been there since forever. We have centuries-old trees. And the site that you're looking at an aerial view of is the Edible Academy, which I started on this location in 2005 as an intern, 2 days out of college, and then became full-time 7 years ago as the manager. And we just completed a $30 million capital campaign to build the building you're looking at now. It'll open in June. The reason I mention this is because both of these green landscapes speak to something I'm very passionate about, above and beyond farming, which is the creation and protection of green spaces within urban environments. So where you just heard an articulate and beautiful vision for how to create a more streamlined and sustainably responsible agricultural space, the sites that I tend to gravitate towards are these open air environments. We're inviting people to take off the lenses that are causing plant blindness and open themselves up to agriculture as one facet of being in the big, beautiful outdoors. The Botanical Garden is 125 years old, and that is young in the world of plants. One of my favorite things is to walk through our magnolia collection, where you're looking at plants that were among the first pollinator flower trees, 300 million years of history right in front of you. Makes you feel awful young. So this opens in June. Come hang out. As mentioned, I also run a nonprofit called Growing Chefs. I'm going to just briefly say the reason I wanted to mention it is for anyone out there who is in their undergrad or graduate right now, scanning the room. When I graduated college, I did not see the job I wanted, which is why I took the internship at the New York Botanic Garden. And so I created my own job. I built up a nonprofit based on the edible schoolyard model, which at the time was only on the West Coast. And so now in its 13th year, Growing Chefs is going strong, doing food education in schools. And I'll give you a pro tip, undergrads. You can create a business card that says director of a nonprofit at age 22, and your career skyrockets, because it's true. And so yeah, so that worked out well. It's a wonderful program. I also wrote a book. It's available for sale in the next room. It's very good. So that's me. If you need to take a photo, I also have cards in the next room, and I look forward to meeting you. All right, so I want to talk about the difference between green roofs and rooftop gardens. I think focusing on vocabulary and education and nuance is a very important part of talking about sustainable cities, urban agriculture, and specifically green roof technology, because putting plants on a roof does not make it a green roof. So the tradition of rooftop gardens is long. I have pictures on here of various iterations of roof gardens. Surprisingly, the oldest green roof in this photo is actually on the bottom. It's the one that looks like a ground level parking lot. That, I think if I remember correctly, was built in 1916, and it's in San Francisco. It looks like it's the ground, but it is actually above, like I said, a parking lot. We have a similar installation. Bryant Park is a green roof above the library stacks of the New York Public Library. Fun fact. So all of these as roof gardens have existed for centuries and centuries. The top one, that's that lovely palace, is the Winter Palace in Russia. So that dates back actual centuries. And I look to this as a model because agriculture itself is a 10,000-ish year tradition. Rooftop gardening has been around for a very long time. And Hernan Cortez writes about seeing azoteas, or roof gardens, in Mexico when he invaded and subsequently destroyed that culture. But he wrote about green roofing even in the 1570s. So why do green roofs matter? Well, if you recognize this landmass, this is the city I live in and love, Manhattan. Actually, I live in Brooklyn, but Manhattan belongs to all of us. And this green space is fundamentally an important part of how landscapes survive. This is Manhattan today, very different. But that split personality is very present in New York City. I'm a big birder. It's a new hobby for me. And I got into birding because birds are one of the most obvious ways you can see history moving through the present. There are migratory birds that come through New York City that have been doing that same exact thing for thousands of years, actually many for centuries, but mostly since the last glacial movement. And so even though I don't see Mannahatta, that green space, anymore, I see these patterns and these ecologies still woven among our skyscrapers. How this connects to green roofs is because green spaces really matter for any landscape, peri-urban, rural, suburban, city, for a couple of ecological reasons, which green roofs all address. Stormwater management. New York City is has the second longest coastline of any city in the world after Hong Kong. So for me as a New Yorker, water management is a big part of the way I look at living in New York. Green roofs replace, in some function, the soil that was lost in the construction of a building. And so when you take away soil space, you take away stormwater capacity, or the ability to absorb stormwater. So green roofs answer to that by continuing to absorb stormwater. They mitigate heat island effect, which it's one thing to say you're uncomfortable in August as you walk through a concrete city sidewalk or parking lot. It's another thing entirely when you translate that to higher asthma rates, higher air conditioning costs, overall city blackouts, et cetera, because of heat island effect. And green roofs also insulate, which is sort of intuitive. They, in the winter period, if a building is running heat, that of course is blowing off the top of the building. The green roof can help capture that, in turn lowering energy costs. So often, depending on who your audience is, you might pitch the energy saving, you might pitch the ecological benefit, and then in my case, we added the layer that it can produce food. I wanted to just show you a couple quick slides that represent that in New York. So when I'm talking about heat island effect, you might be able to locate Central Park as the blue rectangle in the middle of Manhattan. That blue, of course, indicates that it's cooler. And if you look at the map on the right, the vegetation density, it is a reflection of the amount of green space that Central Park offers. So there's a very direct correlation between green spaces being beneficial for heat island and the ability of green roofs to offer that. And then this map, very hard to read, I apologize, so I'll zoom in to my neighborhood. This is a map where the blue dots indicate roofs that are 10,000 square feet or larger and have the structural capacity to hold the weight of a green roof. So these are all the available spaces where a green roof would thrive. And if you think back to that last map, or I can just show you, of where heat island effect is bad, there's a big chunk of red. If you find Central Park again and then drop over to Brooklyn, that big red area is where shipping industry built up. It's along the Newtown Creek. And so there are a lot of warehouses in that area and not a lot of trees. And those are all warehouses that are perfect for green roofs. All right. I see green roof farming goes hand in hand with urban farming. So I just wanted to include a map of all the already existing farms in New York. Urban farms in New York. And the reason I point that out is because I showed you Central Park as an example of a green space that helps capture stormwater and mitigate heat island effect. Ground level urban farms can do the same thing. I just point to green roofs where you can't because there's already a building there. Where do you often find green roofs? I've profiled about 22 different sites in my book, and in researching who I wanted to cover, one of the things I thought about was where green roofs function best. As a virtue of where are there buildings with that structural capacity. And you'll notice that a lot of these, with the exception of LA, where I found a parking lot that had a rooftop garden, most of these most of the green roof examples are in the north. And you might want to think in your head, why? That's why. Snow load capacity. So if a building structurally is designed to hold the weight of snow, there's often the capacity to hold a green roof. And as I was chatting with folks before the presentation, I have to be clear to point out, you must also then be able to have snow load capacity. You can't just build out your farm and then hope it doesn't snow, although increasingly that is the case. But just in case you're wondering what typically makes a roof ready for a green roof, you can usually put about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of soil minimally already on a roof, no additional structural load needed, structural bearing capacity needed. What's nice about that is that even though it's only in the north, you end up with a wide range of growing zones. So there are a lot of different plants that end up in these landscapes. And I'm just going to walk you through the technology of how they work briefly, and then I'll show you some of those roofs briefly as well. So in case you're curious, this is what makes a green roof happen. There's a layer on the bottom that waterproofs the roof. That's usually the first layer that goes down. And this is important because the roof is there to protect the building. So nothing a green roof does should take away from the ability of the roof to do its job. After that, there's typically some sort of membrane that can help with water absorption. In our case, it's a filter fabric. And then on top of that is that cup system. That's for water storage. So if you look to the photograph where my finger is on the cup system with the green marker on my hand, because I work with children a lot, that's the cup system that holds water. And then on top of that is typically another type of waterproof, or sorry, of felt filter or retention fabric. That's there to keep the growing media from going in the cups. Makes sense, right? So green roof companies use many different iterations of this, sometimes 4 layers, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. Ours has 4. So even before the growing media goes on the roof, already those layers are helping with stormwater absorption, heat island mitigation, and insulating the building in the winter. And then on top of that, you put the growing media, and then on top of that, your plants. So green roofs can look many different ways. This is one of the largest in New York City on top of the Jacob Javits Center. It is the largest, sorry. This is an example of a modular system, which is when you, instead of laying down the flat rolls of fabric and waterproofing material and retaining cups, you put down trays. This is one of the oldest examples on a civic building. This is Chicago City Hall, and you can see they've mounded the soil in some areas where there was structural capacity for it. You can plant all wildflowers. This is a beautiful roof in Chicago that evokes the prairie landscape of 11,000 years ago. What you can't experience from only a photograph is the sound of all the happy insects refinding their prairie. And this, I'm happy to point out, is growing in 1 3/4 inches of growing media. And what I'll point out is that the success of a green roof is that all of those layers of filter fabric and water retention provide this beautiful layer of captured stormwater that then gets pulled back up into the growing media. So even though it's shallow and lightweight, it's still able to retain enough water. And also, these are not water-hungry plants. Right plant, right place. Another beautiful example of the exact same depth, this is about 2 inches, 2.5 inches, so a little deeper, of a wildflower palette that's native to New York. This is in Soho. And then this is one of my favorite examples. On the left, you see what the green roof used to look like. This is in Chicago. It was, I hope no one is involved in this project. It was a terrible growing media mix. It had sand in it, which has no cation exchange capacity and only adds weight. So don't put sand in your green roof. This photo on the right is what happened when the Chicago Botanic Windy City growers came in and top dressed with compost. They talked to a structural engineer first. They made sure they could handle the extra weight, including weight through water retention, because compost retains more water than just green roof media. And then they were able to plant vegetables. And this is a 22,000 square foot project. Again, it's Windy City growers. Absolutely phenomenal example of how you can take even an old green roof and turn it into something more dynamic. I will point out, though, both of these sites retain water, mitigate heat island effect, and insulate in the winter. This just happens to be awesomer. So this is my farm, a brief run through. It's only 6 inches in depth. We mitigate, or we deal with that by mounding where we have crops that are more water loving and creating just flat rows wherever the plants can go through a quick cycle and their roots don't develop as much. So I might plant radishes or mesclun mix in the shallower beds, and in the deeper beds I'll plant my tomatoes and peppers. We typically, as a ground level grower, I would get my compost from food waste processing. It's a very bacterially driven soil. In the green roof scenario, you often start using soils that are fungally driven. This is a horse bedding that is being used with mushroom substrate to create green roof soils. And I point that out because one of the most innovative things about our farm is it was the first attempt at commercial green roof growing. So we were given a classic green roof soil. Again, normally I would go with one type. We ended up with another. So one of the challenges we constantly come up against is how to modify or amend our soil in a safe way for the weight load to make it better for vegetable growing. It looks like this. The rocks you see are particulates that help with drainage and airflow. It's expanded clay and shale, in case you're curious. And we run like a traditional farm. We have volunteer days. I have a farming staff. We do a lot of intercropping. This is an example of while we're waiting for our chilies to grow, we're growing microgreens underneath. In New York City, you can get about $42 a pound for microgreens, which is scandalous, but delightful for us as farmers. We amend as classic organic growers do, so here we're adding bat guano. And then overall, thinking about the farm as an ecosystem, we've had animals on the farm. We've had bees that help us with pollination. And one of the neat things I learned about the bees is that as the bees were foraging, of course, our farm isn't nearly large enough for them. So they were bringing back street tree pollen. And if you look at the pollen grains that the bees are putting into the comb, you can get a map of your entire neighborhood because, of course, all pollen grains are different colors, they look different under a microscope. So we were learning more about how our neighborhood was thriving by having these ambassadors come back with postcards. The other thing I'll add about animals, they're there for manure. It's a quick and easy way to close the loop for us. We work with chickens and rabbits. They also make great Instagram photos, which helps with our sales. And then the last thing we're doing to close the loop is seed save. Wherever you're growing in any of these sites, and this was alluded to with the breeding of plants that taste best for their site, you want to think about right plant, right place. So for us, seed saving is a way of choosing the crops that do the best in this very strange 3-story second soil environment, and then save them for the years to come, and then share them with other rooftop growers or the urban growers. I'll just briefly mention that most people should know that if you're envisioning doing a project like mine, it does come with a high cost per square foot. $10 to $22 is probably the starting range for a green roof project. Per square foot, did I say that? 10 to 22 per square foot. So most folks end up just doing standard container gardening, which is also great. I'll point out 2 successful things here. This is a roof accessed through a head house, and it has a 42-inch high parapet with a fence, legally okay. You could also structure it a little more beautifully. And in the case of, I wanted to point out one project that was meant to be a green roof. This is a roof in Boston. I mentioned snow load up at the top. So often you'll find that structural capacity just isn't available for your project. These are farmers that found out that the roof couldn't handle the weight of Boston's snow in addition to a green roof. So they went with a large landscape of container gardens, and in the fall they pick all the milk crates up and they move them to the parapet, which has more structural which is better able to handle the weight load, and then the snow can fall across the roof without worrying about the structural capacity. Skipping. The culture of agriculture is what brought me to agriculture. I just wanted to show you 3 of my favorite rooftop gardens from around the world. And as you're looking at these pictures, just think about what makes them speak to the local culture. So here is a garden in Hong Kong, Italy, and France. And I'll just say one quick thing about this farm before I turn away and give up my microphone. Every green roof I've encountered, I mentioned ours comes from a mushroom substrate mixed with horse bedding. That's a very East Coast local mix. It comes from Pennsylvania, where they grow a lot of mushrooms and they have a lot of horses. This is a green roof in Paris, and the substrate that they used is compost from Versailles, which is rather fabulous. And the aggregate material is pozzolana, which is the original concrete material used to build the city of Lucretia, which is, of course, the precedent city to Paris. It's one of the oldest cities in Europe, if not the oldest. And I just think that's really lovely, because in addition to the techniques that come with gardening and how people express their culture through their horticulture, you also have literally written into the soil your history, your culture, and how you want to move forward. All right, so I will leave you with that thought and my contact info, and I can't wait to talk to you further.
Thank you so much. There's so much rich information here. It's hard to ask people to shorten their comments, but we do want to leave time for questions. Next up, I'm going to ask Kiana Mickey to come to the mic. She's the executive director of Just Food. When we think about urban agriculture, there's questions of technology. There's also inevitably questions of community and society and how we feed ourselves, how we feed each other. And Just Food is a really inspiring organization in terms of addressing those questions about how people can come together to make sure that they and their neighbors are well fed. So Kiana, please come up.
Oh, thank you. I hope I have it together. Hi, good morning, everybody, or afternoon at this point. Thank you for the introduction, Stephanie. I am Kiana Mickey, the Executive Director of Just Food. I'm really happy to be here. It's a spoiler alert, I am not a grower, but I'm somebody who has a background in programming and community advocacy and policy. So I'm hoping that I will do justice to my community partners that are growers and gardeners and farmers today. And I apologize if I keep looking at my notes. I have a lot of thoughts and information running through my head, or if you see me looking at my phone. We have our annual Just Food Conference on Sunday, and we have some unconference programming with partners in the community tomorrow. So it's been really busy. So I'll have to forgive me for looking at my notes more than I usually do. Okay, so I am a relatively new executive director of Just Food. I became the executive director about 10 months ago. Prior to that, I was the policy and advocacy director. And before that, I was the CSA program manager. But my real entry into this work and in what has stoked my passion has been around community outreach, in particular around understanding why our neighborhoods have inequity in our food access, and how to not empower, but engage more people and inform the learning and practices so it feels less intimidating, so people can, in particular historically marginalized folks, can feel more engaged and more self-determined to lift up their needs of their communities and of their families so we can inform policy together. So this is our mission and vision. Something that I've done in my tenure is I've kind of, I'm coming from in Just Food with a long, steep history, over 20 years of urban agriculture training and resources, as well as grassroots food and farm policy. Something that I felt like we needed to do in our transition is to really hold and honor that, but also find ways to lift up equity in our work, and also find ways to more lift up and amplify the work and practice of our community partners, as well as our rural partners. So Just Food is a food access and food justice nonprofit. We're based in New York City. However, our partners are within 250 miles, so hyper-local in the 5 boroughs, and as far as 250 miles, so like a day's trip for our rural growers. And we have a history of connecting folks to food directly from their farmers. So through community-supported agriculture, which started with just a conversation with 5 farmers in the Hudson Valley and a few community folks in the city, has now grown to about 109 from last season, with 30 farmers throughout the region. Community-run farmers markets is also a program that we've has flourished in our time, from, again, a small group of folks that wanted to see access in their community and have connections to a variety of farmers. So we offer trainings and resources so folks in their community can bring markets to their actual community. So they're of and run by the community members, which is, really kind of helps us, again, lift up and amplify the work and self-determination of our partners and growers. The other work that we do is policy and advocacy. We have a long-standing history of trying to, on the local, regional, and federal level, pushing for more equitable policy. One would be, on a local level, pushing for beekeeping to be legalized in New York City, which we were a big supporter of and a driver of that campaign, and making SNAP accessible. Are people familiar with SNAP and EBT? Okay, thank you. Good to know. So SNAP is a federal subsidized program that helps give food insecure folks, under-resourced folks, the opportunity to buy food. So what we encourage and support is not just the access and the incentivization of that, but also to have it in models that people are able to get food from not just grocery stores, or bodegas, but also directly from farmers, like at CSAs or farmers markets. So we were a big contributor or supporter of making sure SNAP was available at CSAs. So here is our like new vision as we've been moving forward since last year, since I came on as ED, is envisioning a sovereign and healthy food system that's rooted in racial, social, and economic environmental justice. As I said earlier, we have long-rooted history in supporting folks that are doing the work on the ground. So in terms of our work, it's continuing to spark people in the work that they want to do to bring back to their communities on the individual, community, and systemic level. So from abandoned lots that turn into community gardens and urban farms by longstanding residents, many have been under-resourced and folks of color. They are able to kind of go back to their neighborhoods and turn dirt to rich soil and grow in their communities. So we have a history of urban ag training and resources, but over the course of the past 20 years, we have moved those programmings from directly out of Just Food and actually supported one of our programs to continue to become their own program, independent program, which is Farm School NYC. So we don't directly do growing or training anymore, but again, we offer support and solidarity of folks that are now really being able to do that work themselves in their communities. So far in my tenure, one of the topics that has risen a lot has been this topic of urban ag. But now when we're hearing about it, it's really rooted in a narrative of it being new or different, or there's the future of farming. And what really strikes me is I'm in support of the breadth of urban ag. I think it's really important to hear and see and be informed by different models. But I think we should also be informed by the long, rich history of urban ag by folks of and for the community. New York City has over 50 to 60 years of history of folks growing in their communities, and many of those practices are of folks that are using ancestral or indigenous growing practices that we know are successful for generations. So there's already inherent resiliency built within those practices. And I think that's really something that we need to continue to hone as we continue to look towards the future of farming. We need to hold, the bounty and variety that our folks are able to grow, even in our city neighborhoods. I kind of call it a little bit like soul science. I feel like urban ag should include science and technology, but also honoring the land, energy, have restorative practices, and really be good for all and accessible to all. So while Just Food's work hasn't recently been directly in growing or training in urban ag, I really hope that we continue to leverage our resources to lift up the need for equity in this space as new models enter the landscape in our grassroots work and policies of our partners. So urban farmers like Cheryl Durant at Kelly Street Garden, well, let me show you her before I show you what she does. So Cheryl's on the left. Karen Washington, who's also an elder and a longstanding urban and rural farmer now, and now an owner of a co-owner of Rise and Root in Dutchess County, is our board chair. So this is us at New Roots Community Farm in the Bronx, a 2-acre farm right on the South Bronx in the Grand Concourse. So what my work is really about and what I wanted to share with folks is, stories of like Karen and Cheryl. In particular, Cheryl is also the farm manager at Kelly Street Garden, another garden that's located in one of the poorest congressional districts in New York City in the South Bronx. And yet at her garden, she was able to grow over 1,000 pounds of food, 60 crop varieties. 25 families receive that food for free. She was able to divert over 300 pounds of food waste. What is also not here that I'd like to mention is she also has stormwater retention projects on her land as well, or on that farm. And the community garden at Kelly Street in particular was started and raised by a collective group of folks in the community when the Bronx was burning. This was a place where people stayed to turn their lots into gardens to feed themselves, and she's continuing that work. And, you know, I think sometimes when we're talking about urban ag, it's also important to not just talk about metrics and value base, but also what is the community benefit that comes? What is the job learning? What is the sharing from generation to generation? What's the sharing of seeds? What's the importance, again, of lifting up the equity to make sure that the work, people do not get minimized, their work is not marginalized, and that this is food that is a part of all of our diets, it fits all of our needs, and also is for everyone and accessible. So, what I really like to lift up and pride folks on is sometimes when we hear community-based growing, we think it's very little or we think it's very small. I feel like even at Kelly Street Garden, which doesn't have a ton of land, it's less than an acre, they have been able to really grow a lot, be able to bring in folks into the community, use tools that are built of and from community growers in order to be able to demonstrate their yield. So what you're seeing here is just a little small sample of farming concrete, and this is them using it at the Kelly Street Garden to reflect not just visually what they're able to grow, but also what they're able to measure. So I think sometimes when we're talking about that, it's really important to highlight, again, the historical opportunities and historical ways that people have found to be ingenious in continuing to use restorative and regenerative practices that are able to give us a multitude of variety of products and food that is homegrown, that is clean, that is that's grown without pesticides, that really fit our whole needs. So not just dominant culture products or food that's maybe inherent to what we've gotten used to in the Northeast, but also knowing like there are quite other things that people are used to in their own cultures and diets that can also be grown in our temperate zones too. So, I approach this work a little bit differently. For me, when I talk about food waste, one thing that lifts up for me is a story that Cheryl shared with me one time when she was doing some composting of sweet potato leaves after harvesting the sweet potatoes. And a few older women of West Indian descent came by and happened to see her doing it. And they saw her about to throw the sweet potato leaves in the compost bin. And I'm not going to do an accent, but they were like, oh no, like, what are you doing? We eat that. We use that. We actually saute it and put it into different meals. It's not compost. And even somebody as experienced and longstanding in the community in farming, Cheryl was shocked and surprised. And again, you think that there's these weeds or elements that we don't think even of dominant culture produce. And here she was about to just compost it to divert it from being at food waste. And meanwhile, somebody actually saw the opportunity to use it in their cultural diet and in their food. And now they have a relationship where when there are items like that or callaloo that grow like a weed, and farmers just tend to compost it, they're actually able to divert it to the homes and families that people that actually want to eat that and grow and live with it. And it offers the opportunity for all of us to learn something beyond our typical diet or a dominant culture diet. So I'm gonna give myself a chance to pause. I probably need a little bit of water. I know we're gonna have more questions here that I wanna lift up. But again, thanks for having me, and I hope that I'm doing a better job of lifting up how important, when we're talking about urban ag, that there are the voices and the work and of the people that incorporate or embody us all. Thank you.
Kiana. So our last speaker for the panel is Jennifer Papa, the founder and executive director of City Green. City Green is right here in Clifton, and as a former city staffer, I can say that it's here in Newark very, very dear to my heart because its mission has to do with revitalizing urban areas, using urban agriculture, and doing that through educational programming. So Jennifer, please come up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be part of a panel of such amazing women. City Green has so much synergy with the other organizations, and I think that our work is unique, but also very similar to everything that everybody's been talking about so far. City Green is an urban farming and gardening organization that works to connect people to nature and healthy food from soil and seed to table. Our headquarters are in Clifton, New Jersey, in a preserved 5-acre lot. It's actually 5-acre farm. Most of our work started in Paterson and Passaic and Jersey City, and so like having an opportunity to gain access to a 5-acre farm in Clifton, like right next door, was such an amazing point of growth. So here you see that we're kind of sandwiched between Route 46 and the Garden State Parkway. Talk about a heat island. It is the hottest place, I think, in Clifton. But all of our work comes from the idea from our community work to this larger scale farming work. We believe that the raising of food is fundamental to our society and that people should be connected to agriculture and to where our food comes from. We also believe in the values of a local food system. So, keeping dollars in the local economy, hiring local people, short distances from farm to table, food security, biodiversity, all of the things that are benefits of local food. So how do we sort of work towards all of that great stuff? City Green started as a community garden organization. I know my clicker's not quite working. It's a nice aerial view of our food production. So we started as a community garden organization working in Paterson, New Jersey. My family were all immigrants to New Jersey City, so these places are very near and dear to my heart. And believing in the power of the thing that the most blighted communities have, and that is people. People who want to make change in their community, who are excited to feed their families healthy food. So that kind of engagement and that using resources such as vacant land and this great old-fashioned people power to create change in landscape is how the organization was sort of born. So we support over 50 community gardens in Passaic County. These are for food production and neighborhood enhancement. We work in large vacant lots, tiny little spots, anywhere someone can envision growing food, we'll help support their garden project. Most of our gardens are in raised beds, so we are importing soil. The part of the benefit of a community garden is kind of alleviating the environmental injustices that a lot of the urban populations are sort of burdened with. So there is toxic metals in the soil, there is lead in the water, there is stormwater runoff issues. So community gardens can help alleviate some of that. We do have to import the compost from a local supporter to the raised beds, but it does help with the heat island effect, and we're producing food and giving people access to green space. The most important part of community gardening is the people and engaging them and making sure that they have a voice and that we are not imposing a vision, but rather supporting the vision that community members have for their own community. The next bit of work that we do is with kids. We have a lot of educational programs. If you want kids to eat healthy food and you want them to get outside and play, they need to grow it and be engaged in that and get their hands in the soil. We run a school garden program that partners with over 90 schools in 6 counties in New Jersey. We run after-school gardens where we build gardens that partner community organizations like the Y or Boys and Girls Club or public libraries. So here we have access to space and access to kids, and we run these weekly educational programs. We had a great experience in Jersey City in a tiny little school garden, raised beds on a parking lot, with first graders, and they were planting carrots, and it was harvest day, and every time one of the students pulled a carrot out of the raised bed, they all burst into applause. So it's like this really amazing connection that kids get to their food when they participate in that. This is our own learning farm. This is part of that 5-acre Clifton property, so this is a larger scale educational venue that we can run field trips and bring schools over to our site to learn. And again, it's all about connecting kids to where their food comes from and getting them to understand sort of the power of being involved in these projects themselves and reaping the fruits of their own labors. We have these 2 great farm locations, one in Clifton and one in Patterson. And besides connecting people to food, we want to connect people to the earth. We want them to see the soil and care for the clean water and understand if they're going to advocate for these things or have a connection to that, they need to participate in it. And we want everybody to have that opportunity. Every summer we hire 18 high school interns from Patterson and Clifton to work on our farms and at our markets. This is a full-blown youth development program, so they are working in our farms and at our garden camps, but they're also learning how to have a job, how to write a resume, how to do some public speaking. So it's sort of this really cool tool where we're engaging them while providing them with some resources of their own. And also the kids who engage in this program are working to give back to their own communities. So we hear so many stories of these kids when they're at the farm stands selling food to their neighbors, being so proud that they helped grow it themselves. It just creates this really unique community connection. So they're feeling really proud of the work that they do. In order for these farms also, I just wanted to mention, are environmentally sustainable as well. So we grow all native to New Jersey perennials around there, so we're attracting great pollinators, we're supporting wildlife, we're sort of creating a green corridor in the concrete places that we work. And then what do we do with all the food we grow? So in the community gardens and school gardens, the people are there consuming that food and using that food, but in the farms that we operate ourselves, we have some goats and chickens, helps close that loop of the farm production. We run our own farm stands. So we have 2 farm stands in Patterson and Clifton. We have a veggie mobile that's running throughout Passaic and all throughout northern New Jersey, all throughout the county, and beyond really, where we're bringing food into food desert neighborhoods. And as Kiana was mentioning about SNAP benefits, we accept SNAP and WIC, so those are federal food dollars, and we double the value of them. So this is a double bucks program. It's part of a national nutrition incentive movement where people are doing this in farm stands and farmers markets all over rural, urban, suburban places, and incentivizing people to use those federal food benefit dollars on local farm fresh food. We also run a Garden State Good Food Network, so we don't only want to do this at our own farm stands. My clicker is running out of battery. We want people throughout the state of New Jersey to be able to access wherever there is a farmer's market. So we support other farmers markets outside of our own with training, funding, and technical assistance to accept federal food benefits and WIC benefits, and double the value of them. So we hope that by running these kind of incentive programs, we want the culture of New Jersey, and especially the urban population of New Jersey, to have access to so much of the bounty that comes from our state and from the neighboring farms in Pennsylvania and New York. So to pull it all together, we are really about connecting people to healthy food and to natural green spaces, towards public health, towards community health, individual health, and also towards a just and equitable food system. Thank you. So farm stands.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody on this fantastic panel. We're going to have, I think, about 15 minutes for questions. I'm sure you all have questions. All right, let's go around the room, starting here. There are microphones. One will come to you.
Hi. The one thing that always puzzles me from the point of view of sustainability, which I really believe in, is how to be commercially sustainable or financially sustainable when you're working with NGOs or when you're working with community gardens. I know you rely a lot on volunteers, but there's got to be, certainly for the commercial venture that we heard about at the beginning, I assume you have a very robust business model. But how about the rest of you? And also, how robust is that model? And can you franchise it to South Jersey, for example, since that's probably beyond your radius?
So I'm not at liberty to say how profitable we are at the moment. However, absolutely, can we license this technology? Absolutely, we can do that. And that is definitely in our future. In terms, though, of profitability, right now we're really focused on baby leafy greens and really, driving that market there. But there's a lot more that we want to do. There's actually a market for our stems as well. So we're working with companies there and for our roots. So we have actually tried using the roots as an adhesive in dog bones. It worked, but the dogs didn't like the bones. So, but there are other ways as well to use our roots, and there are many people interested in that as well. So that's, that obviously adds additional revenue on top of the leafy greens business, but also it's just so gratifying to know that soon we'll have zero waste as well. So.
Thank you. It's a really interesting question. It's something that I struggle with and something I talk to our partners a lot. While Just Food has been around for 20 years, we are definitely right now a smaller, I have a staff of 5. I have 2 full-time folks, all women, but definitely a nimble, more under-resourced grassroots organization. And yet, we still do hold a certain level of privilege in this work. We have a 501c3, we're a nonprofit status. We have have slightly more resources and having a business structure that even some of our community partners don't have. So when we talk about sustainability, I think for me, it's not just sustainability in the actual work or the produce that's being grown, but like you're saying, the financial viability. Being, a nonprofit or being a grassroots group, you're kind of left to fend and fight for the same pots of money. Most of them are grants. Most of them is either, trying to find ways to fund within your community or trying to create messaging that would entice other folks to support that work that might have funds that you don't have. So that becomes a challenge. And, I think it's important to kind of lift up how unique or different that can be, because when you kind of take a step into the nonprofit industrial matrix, if you will, is what I call it, you see we are kind of fighting again against each other for similar pots of money. We're fighting, or we're looking for funds with high metrics. We are expected to be proven. So these have to be proven successful metrics, working from a deficit lens. So how do you continue to find those funds to do the work that you're doing, and the specific details or around those kind of grants? It makes that kind of work, especially if you're mission aligned, that much harder to do. So folks, we continue to find ways to meet those metrics, and we do, and a lot of times we get creative in terms of how to partner with each other. Something I'm trying to bring to Just Food is, again, how can we leverage our privilege to really support our partners, and can we be innovative capacity builders so they can really focus on their work? And what are some things that we can do maybe as a backbone organization to lift that work so we're building solidarity, but also we're all meeting our mutual needs? Because we're not small groups here and there individually with small limited funds are not gonna really be able to address the disparities that we're facing. I think we also need to hold that we're working with persistent, structural, purposeful inequities, racist, classist strategies and issues with that in our communities, in our work. For me, being somebody who's really fighting for funds or, working with partners to kind of address funds, even funds that are supposedly identified for us, for community-based work, you can go to other spaces and see that the lens is really different in the startup world and startup culture, where they're able to be funded to fail and funded to figure things out by the millions in a lot of cases, where that same kind of structure around grants may not always hold the same. So it's always kind of something to hold when you're kind of thinking about growing and businesses and viabilities. How can we do with what we have that we're pushing back on those inequities and at the same time meeting our needs so nobody is really left out of that struggle? I don't have a real solid answer is my long answer, but it's something that I think we need to continue to push back throughout our work, whether it's on the ground in the growing or selling of our work and getting savvy about different markets. It's about how to find ways to work with each other where we're leveraging the limited resources we do have together and building solidarity around that. But I think it's also important to kind of encourage and push back even folks that are using their dollar to support that work on the other opportunities around funding. So the funding is a little bit more equitable, a little bit more allocated and distributed a little bit more equally. So we're able to kind of have the breadth of work that we really need in order to address the needs in all our communities.
Any quick thoughts on commercial viability, Annie or Jennifer?
I mean, in the interest of time and being succinct, I work in both worlds. I have a commercial farm and I work for a 125-year-old nonprofit. And all I can suggest is that these are all examples of very small scale in a much larger and deeply fraught food system. So regardless of the relative success of each of these examples, the thing that always excites me is that these examples are drawing together a crowd of 300 people to talk about what probably concerns all of us, which is largely we need to address how food is grown. So I'm not going to answer you directly, but that's what I think.
Thank you.
I think that we at City Green also struggle with the same issues. We are grant funded largely, but I think that the models that we're trying to move towards is that this is become sort of the local fabric of local governments, so that if local governments are prioritizing this, they're funding the urban agriculture work that's happening in their own communities. So we've had experience getting funded through our city of Patterson and the work that we do there. With the Garden State Good Food Network, we're hoping to be funded through the state eventually. There are other great models in Maine and Massachusetts and Virginia where states have prioritized this incentive program and just make it part of their health and human services budget. So I think that some of the policy and advocacy work that Just Roots does is really important, and Wholesome Wave, who started the National Nutrition Incentive Network, to bring this kind of stuff to the forefront, create examples, show examples, demonstrate how this can be funded through government funding on a local level, and that way we're not fighting over pots of money, but really prioritizing this sort of proactive health right within our policies in our local cities.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hello. So I was just gonna ask, I volunteer at a historical farm, and I was just wondering if the practices you're using today, how deeply rooted they are in the activism communities, and how the new sustainable processes will drive in the future, I guess. So, yeah.
I'll speak to that a little bit. So it's really interesting that there's been so much academic work done on sustainable farming and organic farming and permaculture, which all seem like really great new techniques, but they really are very ancient farming techniques. So while they're, they seem new and exciting to us, these are practices that we're really bringing back where they're, the farms are using waste from animals that live on the farm, and they are building soil that way and composting and putting things like this sort of closed loop system, putting inputs back into the farm that come out of the farm itself. So I think that it's really important to honor the indigenous knowledge, the ancestral knowledge that we have in our farming operations. And while there's always academic improvement and there's new techniques to doing things, the way that we're farming sustainably and organically with crop rotation and Natural pest management and soil building are all very, ancient, great farming techniques that we are trying to bring back, especially in the face of climate change and in order to be climate resilient.
I'm going to a quick other tag on to that. One of the saddest things to me about agriculture at large in our country is the narrowing and the monoculture of the crops that are available to us. And one of the greatest things about agriculture before 100 years ago is that localizing seed saving was a really big part of how people looked at their farm practices. And that builds resiliency in that biodiversity. And in an era of climate change, I think it's really important to consider that as one of the more important agricultural techniques to hold on to. So even at a space like AeroFarm, which is a very new technology in the farm landscape, you can continue to practice a diversity of crops, which is an important way to preserve our food system.
We have a number of questions in the audience. So with permission from the panel, I wonder if we could collect a few more questions and then ask the panelists to respond. Here and then behind.
While she's passing the mic, I'll quickly I want to echo that. I think something that I hear from my growing partners a lot is the importance of seed sovereignty and seed saving and making sure that that's something we fight for. The concern about monocropping is definitely have devastated us in terms of resiliency and being resilient in the work that we're doing and the foods that we're eating.
On the positive side, when all you agricultural people get together, what do you talk about among yourselves as to where we'll be in 20 years?
Yeah, when we get together, I don't know about you guys, we talk about how tired we are. No, but 20 years from now, I mean, I think you're seeing the beginning of that, and this panel well represents it in terms of diversity of approach. So what I find most exciting about, I mentioned in my slides the history of roof gardening in particular and how diverse that was. And I think over time and with development, you're seeing these different approaches, whether it's aeroponics or hydroponics, green roofs or ground level farming, all of these models figuring themselves out from an agricultural perspective. And then the additional thing is, we didn't talk about this as explicitly, but all of us are offering different styles of employment and participation. We're all growing different vegetables, which we didn't get to talk about at all, which is a shame because that's tons of fun. And then this is just an East Coast regional group. So often when I get together with other people, particularly if I'm in a different area of the country or the world, one of the more exciting things to talk about are those differences and commonalities in those choices.
Other brief thoughts on the 20-year or even 50-year time horizon? We are designing the future here, after all.
Something that we talk about, and we'll probably be talking a lot about it on Sunday at the conference, is, how do we, the theme for this year's conference is persist and resist. So how do we continue to find ways to thrive, to build solidarity, to grow, to live, to continue to support the diversity that we need in our life and in our work. And how do we resist? So is resisting active and positive? How do we continue to push back on the inequities that are really impacting our work and holding that balance? Because if we're not taking care of ourselves or taking wholly, whether it's in our food and in our bodies, we're not going to really be able to continue to resist or persist. So that's something that we talk about a lot, and we'll probably talk about and explore ways of approaching that. I think in 15 and 20 years, it really needs to be a healthy, active mix of approaches and folks in the work. I think we need to see ways to connect the urban and rural agriculture. I think we need to see more ways to collaborate and learn from each other and improve our models, and also evoke the things that really helped us stay the course for generations, if not longer. In the work, I think it needs to kind of be a place that we see the representation that we see here. It needs to hold all of us. It needs to be able to feed all of us in the work that we're doing and the produce that we're growing.
Nope. And I guess all I have to say is that with population growth where it is, I believe most of it is going to really be centered around urban areas. And so I do think it's going to require, diversity of farming. And so I truly believe that, for aerofarms, we're really on the cusp of a post-organic era. And so, growing organically is a lot about managing the soil to produce great flavorful crops, but we can also do that using other growing techniques too. So hydroponics, aeroponics, and I think it's going to take a lot of education within our communities about how it is still a very good and sustainable way to grow, and it does not sacrifice flavor or taste, and in fact it can enhance it, and you can have more nutritionally dense food as well, and with a lot less waste than any other type of farming.
Thanks. There, and then if you have a burning remaining question, can you raise your hand so I can see where you are? Oh, we might end on time. This is
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Sibley's environmental engineering background. Question, just curious, how is the component of the material you use for providing the nutrients to the plants, how is that determined? I'm just curious about the science behind that to obtain optimal produce.
Sure. So it's the same sort of fertilizer nutrients that are found in the soil as well. So with science, we're able to optimize exactly what we give plants. So in the soil, you always have microenvironments, right? So your plants, nothing is typically always there. The root system has to branch out. It has to search for nutrients. And so, optimal growth is hard to achieve, and hence why you have a 50% loss in the field, right, when it comes to greens. And so using aeroponics, using hydroponics, you're able to deliver that plant just exactly what it needs, not any more, not any less, right, to get optimal growth.
All right, do we have a last question from the audience? We are right at time. Oh, yes.
I'm Suzanne Ishii from the Center for Creative Placemaking and working here at NJIT with Continuing Professional Education Program. I have just one quick question. I know that all of you are dealing with urban farming, but I'm wondering what kind of work you may be doing, collaborating, investigating, researching, training within our rural areas. I believe that there's a misconception that there's fantastic farming growing in our rural areas and that those who live there, we have not the same inequality numbers, which would be erroneous, and with regards to food sources, and that our grocery stores are filled with locally sourced foods, which would also be erroneous because we have the same carbon footprint of how far they're traveling from farm to our retailers. So I'm just wondering what kind of work you're doing with that. We have lots of empty warehouses and abandoned lots.
So if I can, I'll begin with this one because I am a Midwesterner. I'm from Iowa. I have grown up surrounded by beautiful rows of corn and soybean, and worked for DuPont Pioneer for a good majority of my career as well. And what I was excited about getting into the urban ag industry is so much that we have learned from traditional farming. And a lot of it has to do with the technology that they're using today in farming as well. So in order to manage your fields better, they're doing a lot of imaging technology, using drones, as well as a lot of, testing for different nutrients in the soil. So where I see what, and I'm excited about, is I can take that technology and I can apply it to urban farming as well. So I actually have a background in imaging as well. And so if you think of a flat of plants, you could think of that as a plot in a field as well. And as that as those plants grow, you can image them over time to understand what their needs are. So in urban ag, it's all about consistent growing, and we're getting there, but we're learning a lot, and we can use the technology that is now routinely used in traditional farming to apply it there. So at AeroFarms, we use a lot of data. So we have a lot of sensors to understand, humidity, temperature, CO2 levels, everything it is about the environment, and about how those plants are responding to the environment, so that we can optimize growing. So for me, I think it's really exciting because I've learned a lot from traditional farming and using it to apply to urban ag.
Other concluding thoughts about the rural-urban intersection?
Obviously, we're doing most of our work in urban areas as far as our food growing, but we do make connections to rural communities in sourcing fruits that we cannot grow, such as orchard fruits and corn that everybody wants to see at a farmer's market and we don't have space for. But our school garden program is all over the place in rural, suburban, and urban areas, and our Garden State Good Food Network incentivizing, training farmers markets to take federal food benefits and double the value of them is in farm stands all over the state, also rural, urban, and suburban areas. So we are trying to always make those connections to even the work that we do supporting some more urban farmers markets. Those markets are in turn, by accepting food benefits, creating new economic opportunity for rural farmers. So we're always trying to think about supporting rural farmers, connecting with rural farmers. Obviously, in the small spaces we grow, we can never feed a whole city on the food that's grown, and we really like to use our farming more as a connection to get urban populations to value farming so that they also value the rural work that's going on.
Oh yeah, I would love to echo that. A lot of our work has some overlap in that Just Food, we're rooted in urban-rural linkages. That's where our start came from community-supported agriculture, having regional farmers come into the city. What we were able to do over time is continue to find ways that urban and rural growers can support each other in their work, not just through models like community-run farmers markets and CSAs and other direct marketing models and outlets in the city, but also in our trainings, we do we have equity and justice rooted trainings around advocacy, around how to start CSA models, how to start community-run markets that are able to support regional farm viability. We also, again, like our partner with Farm School NYC, it's actually an urban ag training certificate program for folks to be able to learn sustainable practices, soil and non-soil based work around also having a root in racial equity to that work. And a lot of our alumni, or a lot of the alumni of Farm School, while they might have started in urban areas, and their apprenticeships are actually done in the city and also within the region, and a lot of them have actually moved into rural farming as well. Just Food directly, we also do policy work on the federal level as well. So I think for me directly on this panel, something that I think my work does to kind of support that is kind of like what she was saying, is supporting and advocating for government funds to go to supporting regional farmers, so there's more folks able to buy their food, and also continue to find ways and projects and research that can actually increase farm viability in their urban and regional scale. Yeah.
All right.
I think we're going to thank this panel because
we are at time. Thank you so much.